The day my son told me to leave my own home, I realized something had changed in him that I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just the words he used, it was the way he looked at me, like I was an inconvenience standing in the way of his new life. "Mom, you can't keep living here," Daniel said, standing in the doorway of the living room with his arms folded across his chest. Behind him, his wife Megan stood silently, watching the conversation with an expression that looked far too satisfied for the situation we were in. I set down the cup of tea I had been holding and looked at my son carefully. For a moment, I wondered if he was joking, if this was some strange misunderstanding. "Excuse me?" I asked quietly. Daniel sighed the way people do when they believe they're being extremely patient with someone difficult. "You heard me. Megan and I have talked about this a lot. This place is too big for you, and it would make more sense if we lived here." The room suddenly felt very quiet. "This is my apartment," I replied. Megan finally spoke, her voice sweet but sharp beneath the surface. "Well, technically, yes, but you're getting older. It's not safe for you to live alone in such a big space. There are wonderful senior communities where you could live comfortably." I had heard that argument before. For the past 6 months, Megan had been dropping little suggestions every time she visited. She would look around my apartment with that polite smile and say things like, "It must be hard to maintain such a big place at your age," or "Wouldn't it be easier if you lived somewhere with staff to help you?" At first, I ignored it, but the comments kept coming. Daniel walked further into the room and sat down on the couch. "Mom, we're not trying to hurt you," he said. "We're just thinking about what makes the most sense." "What makes the most sense?" Megan repeated softly. I looked around the apartment. The large windows facing the city skyline, the bookshelf my husband built 20 years ago, the small kitchen where Daniel used to sit at the counter doing homework while I cooked dinner. Every corner held a memory. "You want me to move out," I said slowly. Daniel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "You'd still have a place to live. Megan found a very nice retirement apartment about 30 minutes away." Megan stepped forward and placed a brochure on the table. I didn't even look at it. "And you would move in here?" I asked. Daniel nodded again. "Well, temporarily," he said, "until we buy our own place." I studied his face carefully. He truly believed he was being reasonable, or at least he wanted to believe it. Megan placed her hand on his shoulder. "We're starting a family soon. A bigger space would help us a lot." I could feel something inside me slowly breaking. Not anger, something deeper. Disappointment. "You're asking your mother to leave her home so you can live here?" I said quietly. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "When you say it like that, it sounds worse than it is." I almost laughed. "How should I say it then?" He didn't answer. Megan did. "You should say that your son and his wife need support while they build their future." Her smile never left her face, but her eyes were cold. I had seen that look before. The first time Megan visited this apartment 2 years ago. She had walked through the rooms slowly, examining everything with careful interest. The location, the size, the view. Back then, I had already suspected what kind of person she was, but I had stayed quiet for Daniel's sake. "You have 2 weeks," Megan said suddenly. Daniel looked at her, surprised. "Megan?" "It's more than fair," she continued calmly. "Moving takes time." I stared at her. "You're giving me a deadline to leave my own home?" Daniel stood up quickly. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Something inside my chest went completely still. I realized then that my son truly believed this was normal, that asking his mother to move out was just another practical decision. "I see," I said softly. Megan relaxed slightly, clearly believing the conversation was going her way. Daniel looked relieved. "I knew you'd understand." I didn't argue, I didn't shout, I simply nodded. "All right," I said. They both looked surprised. "That's it?" Megan asked. "Yes." Daniel smiled awkwardly. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd be reasonable." Reasonable. That word echoed in my mind long after they left the room. Later that evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the lights of the city. I thought about the last 30 years, about the sacrifices I made to raise Daniel after his father passed away, about the nights I worked late while he slept in the next room, about the promise I made to myself that he would always have a better life than I did. And somehow, somewhere along the way, that promise had turned into something else, something that allowed him to forget who I was, or perhaps he had never really known. 2 days later, I visited my lawyer. Mr. Harris had known me for over 15 years. When I walked into his office, he immediately noticed the seriousness on my face. "Margaret," he said, "what happened?" I sat down across from his desk. "My son asked me to move out of my apartment." Mr. Harris frowned. "That doesn't sound like him." I smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how much people can change." He folded his hands. "And what would you like to do?" I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents most people in my family had never seen. Mr. Harris opened the folder slowly. His eyes moved across the papers one by one. Then he looked up at me. "Are you sure you want to reveal this?" "Yes. You've kept it private for more than 20 years." "I know." He leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. "Your son doesn't know?" "No." "And his wife?" "Definitely not." Mr. Harris closed the folder carefully. "Well," he said, "this will certainly be educational." 3 days later, Daniel received a phone call that changed everything. He was sitting in the living room when his phone rang. "Hello." "Good afternoon," a professional voice said. "This is Robert Collins from Collins Property Management." Daniel frowned. "Okay. I'm calling regarding your occupancy at 214 Westwood Avenue." Daniel looked confused. "That's my mother's apartment." "Yes," the man replied, "and we've been informed by the owner that the building will be undergoing management changes." Daniel blinked. "I don't understand." "There will be a review of all tenants." "Tenants?" "Yes, sir." Daniel laughed nervously. "I think you're mistaken. My mother owns that apartment." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "No, sir," the man said politely. "Your mother owns the entire building." Silence filled the room. "What? The building contains 8 units? All are owned by Mrs. Margaret Lawson." Daniel felt his stomach drop. That can't be right." "It is, sir. She purchased the property 22 years ago." Daniel looked around the apartment slowly. The walls, the hallway, the ceiling, the entire building owned by his mother. "But we were planning to live here," he said weakly. "I'm afraid that decision belongs entirely to the owner." Daniel ended the call with shaking hands. Megan walked into the room a moment later. "Who was that?" Daniel looked at her in disbelief. "It was the property manager." "So?" He swallowed hard. "Apparently, my mother owns the whole building." Megan stared at him. "What?" "Not just the apartment, the entire building." For the first time since she'd known him, Megan had no words. And at that exact moment, my phone began ringing.